This is the last from this week that I'm talking about doubt. We finished up with Prophet Isaiah on Habakkuk yesterday. Today I'd like to look at a more personal level of doubt in our lives, and that deals with the doubt of trusting God in the midst of a difficult situation. So I'd like to share that oftentimes God puts me in a situation where I want more information. God wants me to trust him and in the situation, and I simply want, before I trust him, I would like to know a little bit more about it. I know he wants me to trust him, but I would like to know, well, what else is going to happen here? I don't have enough information, Lord. If I just knew a little bit more, then I could trust you. This is pretty common for me, and once the Lord tests me in one area, he'll test me in another area. And I think this is pretty common for people in the scriptures. If you ever looked at people throughout the scriptures, Abraham and Joseph, Moses, Job, David, they all are tested in many different areas. I'm sure that you were tested as well with different circumstances, with different areas of your life. And so I wanted to look at this pattern in our lives of God putting us in circumstances, saying, trust me, and how do you learn to trust someone? When I went up to the prison and was talking with people there, I realized after a little while that the inmates were pushing people to trust them quicker than you normally trust. And there's a pattern you go through when you learn to trust someone. You can't do it immediately. You have to see how a person is trustworthy. So I thought I'd take a look at the life of Peter and see how the Lord caused Peter to trust in him. And so if we look at Luke chapter 5, verse 1 through 5, this is when Peter goes up to the disciples, and he first calls Peter. And Peter's a fisherman. He's out on a boat. Jesus gets in one of the boats and asks him to set out a little bit from shore. And so Peter's been fishing. So Jesus says in Luke 5:1, when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into the deep water and let down the nets for a cast. Simon answered, Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. He could have stopped there, right? But because you say so, I will let down the nets. So Peter's reluctant. He's a fisherman. Is Jesus a fisherman? No, he's a carpenter. Does he know what he's talking about? Well, Peter might have said, you know what? You don't know what you're talking about. I'm a fisherman. I know what I'm talking about. I've been working really hard and you don't know. So he could have dismissed what Jesus said, but he didn't. And he thought, okay, I'll do it. His response, though, when they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break, so they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. They came and filled both boats so full they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man. And look at Jesus' response. Then Jesus said to Simon, Don't be afraid. From now on, you will catch men. So not only does he help Peter, he pays him for the use of his boat. He knows Peter, and he's not put off by Peter. He's not shocked by Peter's behavior or by his life, but he has great plans for Peter that Peter doesn't even know about. If you look at Mark chapter 4, so Peter's trusted Jesus. Mark chapter 4, verse 35. Again, Peter's familiar with being on the lake. Verse 35, that day when evening came, he said to his disciples, let us go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along. Just as he was in the boat, there were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, Quiet, Be still." Then the wind died down. It was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." This is a shock. There's a storm on the lake, and Jesus speaks to the storm and tells the storm to be quiet. If some of us spoke to the storm, they might haul us away and put us in a padded cell. But again, if you saw this, you might wonder, who is this? And how in the world does he speak to the wind and the waves and they obey him? And then another passage in Matthew chapter 14, verse 22 through 31. I love this because of the challenge. Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. During the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they cried. They said and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You have little faith," he said. "Why did you doubt?" Why did you doubt? My goodness. Any of you walked on water? Nobody else got out of the boat. So this is one of those things that you're in the midst of a storm, and you see somebody walking past you, and you realize it's the Lord. So again, this is one of those things where how do you develop faith? How do you develop faith when our natural tendency is to doubt? Well, in the circumstances, Peter says, "Lord, tell me to come to you." And Jesus says, "Come." So do you depend upon your own understanding? No. Do you ask God? When God does this, God puts us in a situation and says, "Trust me." And my initial response is, I need more information. I don't have information. I would have been one of the people that sat in the boat that said, "I don't think so. I'll wait for Peter and all the rest of the disciples to go ahead." I'm sure you have examples in your own life in which it's the greater part of wisdom to not go ahead. But God is working on each of us. And there's a passage that I'm sure you're all aware of in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 and 6. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight." So what does God want from us? He's going to test us. That's not with a view of making us fall flat on our faces. He wants us to trust him. Our natural reaction is to doubt and to wonder, is God worthy of our trust? Our natural reaction is to want more information, is if I just had it more, if I knew exactly what was going to happen to the nth degree, then I could trust God. And then once God tests us in one area, he will test us in another area. Believe me, once you trust him in one area, he's going to test us in other areas. You trust him in finances? Okay. How about with your kids? You trust him with your kids? How about your job? How about your health? All these areas are areas that we need to trust the Lord in rather than trust ourselves. There's another one in Proverbs I wanted to read. Proverbs 32. Excuse me, that's not going to work. Psalm 32. Psalm 32, verse 10. Many are the woes of the wicked, but the Lord's unfailing love surrounds the man who trusts in him. God is going to be with us. And I'm going to give Peter the last word in 1 Peter 5:7. Peter, learn to trust the Lord. And these go together. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, 1 Peter 5:6 and 7, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. We still struggle to trust. Trust is the opposite of doubt, but we can cast all our worries on him in the midst of any situation. He wants us to toss those cares, those worries, those anxieties on him in the midst of it, not later, not after the struggle, not after the circumstances are done, but in the midst of it, during the time of crisis. We're going to have plenty of times coming up in which we can learn to trust God in the midst of a difficult circumstance. Have a good one.